changed. The prologue. Okay, that's where it starts. Okay. Arthur takes care of the family he has for generation. He is an immortal. His duty has always been to protect their lineage, which is unbeknown to them. They, like so many others, have fallen under the spell of ignorance created by the vampires, the ones who currently rule the 9 worlds and have been ruling since the death of the Old Father. Those vampires hide in the shadows and rule the worlds with mind control. The immortal protector could tell them the truth, but the time was not yet at hand. Also, it was not his decision to make. Most of the immortals had fought openly against the Order of the Snake, the empire of the vampires, and unfortunately lost. Arthur and his brother-in-arms, Ulrich, were the last ones remaining in the service of the Allfather on Middle-earth. If they were caught by the Order of the Snake, their 700-year-old mission would fail. The Allfather needed them both to ensure that one of the descendants would restore the throne. For this reason, they had both spent many years in invisible mode created by their full body armor. Since Henry, their last brother-in-arms, had been caught, Arthur and Ulrich had to remain unseen by mankind. Also, the vampires were able to see anywhere they wished, and the Order had eyes all over the 9 worlds. Now it was the year 2001, and the last 2 family heirs were still safely hidden from the Dark Lord's knowledge, who is the supreme leader of the vampires. Arthur had made sure of that for 7 centuries, and he intended to keep it that way. His hopes were all set into restoring the throne one day and put an end to the rule of the bloodsuckers. Since these undead beings had taken control over the 9 worlds, humans, dwarves, and elves had become mere slaves, resources for the hunger of the parasite races such as the demons who feed on the living. Arthur was patient, however, knowing that they would come sooner or later. The livings will be set free from the dark creatures. This young boy he was guarding was already 5 years old. He was the only one who had seen through this shield of invisibility behind which he was hiding. The young boy had shared his vision, but ignorantly, his parents had just assumed that he was imagining things. A day earlier, as Arthur was praying to the Norns, he had a vision about Jason, this young boy whom he had felt had a special soul. The Norns would know whose soul was worthy of the throne. He is the one we have been waiting for, they told him, in a glorious vision filled with powerful heavenly emotions. Arthur cried at the wonderful news. He hadn't talked to anyone for a long time, and this had been an intense connection with the Holy Spirit of Yggdrasil. Today, they were embarking on a 33-hour drive from St. John's, Newfoundland to New York. A family trip, nothing extraordinary, but Arthur had a feeling something was off. Something was going to happen. He kept praying to the Norns, and they had shown him the way to Valhalla so he could be at the service of the Allfather on Middle-earth. The Edison family, Grandpa James, Jared, his wife Angela, and their son Jason had started their long journey to New York. Arthur following them in the air. His armor was equipped with wings and also capable of becoming invisible. The immortal, at the service of the Allfather, enjoyed the view of the beautiful North American landscape from the air, although he preferred running to flying. Out of curiosity and precaution, he was listening to their conversation. Tomorrow morning, we're going to meet with my old friend at the World Trade Center. Grandpa informed his son, who was driving. Angela and Jason were seated in the back. That's all right, Dad. You can go by yourself because Angela and I are going to relax at a hotel. Grandpa sighed. It was unbelievable. He was the oldest, but the one with the most energy. I can go with you, Grandpa, Jason said enthusiastically. The old white-haired man turned around, his green eyes staring at his grandson, who had short brown hair and similar-looking eyes. You bet, champ. The 5-year-old smiled and shouted victory in his excitement. Yay! Okay, let's go back. Jason was quite aware of Arthur flying near the car, and he waved. The immortal smiled back at the young boy wearing in his guardian armor that made him invisible to the others. Angela was troubled about Jason's imaginary friends, but she tried not to think about it as she watched him play with his action figures. "Who is this old friend, Pa?" Jared asked, intrigued by the secretive meeting his father had. Grandpa growled something inaudible to avoid the subject, which just made him more inquisitive. "An old friend from, the war." Grandpa was that old indeed. "And what are you and your old friend going to talk about?" Grandpa didn't like being interrogated about the war. This subject was off limits to anyone who hadn't been there to witness the horrors. This trip was going to be long enough, however, to have an interesting conversation. "We're going to talk about what we saw beyond Antarctica." "Beyond? What do you mean beyond? You have been there? What did you see?" Jared couldn't believe his ears. His father had never talked about that. Usually, James kept these subjects close to his heart, but he felt like telling the truth after all these years of keeping secrets. "We found a tunnel leading to another world, which has a different sun." This information distracted his son for an instant, almost causing an accident. Fortunately, Arthur was there to avert it, keeping them safe. "So, are you saying you went to the Hollow Earth or something like that?" Grandpa smiled at his son, who now seemed interested in conversation. "Son, it didn't feel like a hollow earth. I mean, we didn't go down into the tunnel, but rather straight ahead above sea level, and we emerged on the shore of another world with another sun beyond Antarctica." "Beyond? On the other side of the Pacific Ocean?" "No, son, never mind. You weren't there. How could you know?" Jared and his wife exchanged a look in the mirror, and she frowned, insisting he respected his father, especially in front of Jason. The two hadn't always understood each other on certain subjects, and Angela was always there to avert a possible debate turning into a fight. "Sorry, Dad. I'm just trying to understand. You know, our ancestors mentioned there were 9 worlds," Grandpa told his son, then Angela and Jason looking at them in the mirror. Jason caught his grandpa's reflection in the mirror for an instant and smiled at him, then continued playing with his superheroes, making them fly around with so much passion and dressing them in the armor of his imaginary friend, the Night Author, with giant white wings like an angel. Grandpa felt happy to witness this beautiful moment of Jason's childhood, staring at his action figure with a feeling of déjà vu. He knew life was short, and looking at his grandson, James always saw a younger copy of himself, making him feel constant love in his delightful presence. The young boy was always cheerful, imaginative, and loved spending time with him. "You mean the pagan legends of the Vikings?" mentioned Jared, trying to follow the conversation. "Yes, son, that's what I mean," he answered, a little upset to be disturbed in his thoughts while he was watching his grandson play. "Well, the 9 worlds are the planets of the solar system," Jared concluded. Grandpa growled again, showing he didn't agree with him and tried avoiding the subject. I don't think the legends referred to them as planets, but planes." He finally spoke out after taking a time to get lost in his mind again. "And what's the difference, Dad? Planes are flat lands, whereas planets are wandering stars we assume to be spherical, so they can be the same thing," he quickly answered, showing he was not evasive about this statement. Jared hadn't understood. "You know that when we went to the moon, all those Viking legends were disproved. So what makes you believe there could be other worlds beyond Antarctica?" Eh? "Believe?" Grandpa was offended. "I saw it with my own eyes, son. And I know for sure that we never went to the moon. I swear to you." James had a very serious tone in his voice, almost alarming his daughter-in-law and Jason, that suddenly looked over to see what was going on between them. "Come on, Dad, how would you know that?" he argued with plain disrespect for his father's promise to speak the truth. "Jared," Angela warned him to lower his voice and stay polite. Grandpa had a confession to make, to explain. Let's go back. To explain himself, and it showed in the expression of his face. something he had always hidden from his son. They remained quiet for long hours, in which they exchanged the wheel a couple of times. When Angel and Jason were finally asleep in the back, Grandpa slowly took a swastika medal from his pocket. Jared looked at it, and all kinds of thoughts suddenly went through his mind. "You took that from a soldier you faced in battle?" Grandpa remained silent. Jared looked him in the eyes for a moment, keeping one hand on the wheel. "No, son. You finally came clean. This was part of my uniform." It suddenly hit Jared. He realized that his entire life he had believed that his dad had fought on the side of the victors, never for a moment thinking that, "So what happened? I was posted far from any conflicts, or so I thought, in Antarctica doing scientific research." Jared was silent, needing time to digest the news. Then James resumed his story. "I personally knew the director of the American Space Agency, as it was one of ours, during the Second Great War. After D-Day, he was hired by the Americans and worked closely with filmmakers. No one ever went to the moon, son. Of that, you can be sure." His son was stunned, although he wasn't thinking about the moon anymore, but about the fact that he was ignorant of his true origins. "So were Germans?" he asked. "Norwegians," Grandpa Edison corrected. "We immigrated to Canada after the Second Great War near the ancient Viking settlements to start anew." Arthur, their immortal protector, was listening too. Also remembered the Second Great War when he had been protecting James Edison. "I've always believed you fought with the Canadian forces. This is a real shock to me," he complained, having trouble coming to grips with the fact that he was the son of a National Socialist from the war. "You know, in war there are no good or bad sides. From my point of view back then, the Red Army of the Soviet Communists was the enemy. This is why I joined the fight against them. I never thought we would become enemies of England, France, or North America." Jared was listening to his father giving accounts of his past life, explaining what he had misunderstood from the war because of the propaganda Hollywood retold in their movies. And Arthur agreed with him. He actually knew the Order of the Snake, the Empire of the Vampires, had been the ones responsible for these great wars, unknown to the human slaves who fought with their lives without even knowing why. Eventually, they reached their destination, once in New York. In a hotel, they unpacked and made ready for a restful night. During the night, the immortal kept his vigil over them. The next day, Jason was the first to awaken, watching cartoons and playing with his superhero action figures. Grandpa joined him and had some coffee before getting ready for his appointment, while Angela made Jason ready to accompany his grandpa to the World Trade Center, which was nearby. Then Grandpa and Jason were on their way. Arthur followed them closely as they entered the enormous building. As soon as he stepped in with them, he noticed his brother-in-arms, also in invisibility mode, taking care of another family, also being possible rightful heirs to the throne. "Brother, is that you?" he asked into the communication device of his armor. "Long time no see." He was right, of course, because neither of them had been visible for some time now. They could see each other with the infrared abilities of their visors. They hugged in a brotherly way. "What are you doing here in New York?" Ulrich pointed at the family he was protecting. They were standing with Arthur's protege. Suddenly, he remembered the conversation during the trip. He realized the old friend James had talked about was his cousin, but neither knew they were related. A wonderful coincidence, thought Arthur. The former military companion of James, whose name was Vidar, was accompanied by his wife, their son and his wife, with their baby daughter. They were all dressed as if going to church, the men with suits and their wives with pretty dresses. "What's her name?" "What's her name?" Jason asked politely, as he was intrigued by the baby girl. "Cassandra," the mother gently replied. He smiled at the baby, who miraculously smiled back. That made Jason super happy, and he immediately wished he had a little sister like her. "And where's your son, my friend?" Vidar asked James. "He stayed in bed at the hotel. You know how these kids are nowadays." They sat in a restaurant enjoying their long-awaited reunion, while the old man showed him the black and white pictures he had kept from their expedition to Antarctica and the other world that they had discovered. Jason played just by their side. It is good to see that these photos still exist after all these years. I was starting to think I had imagined it all to replace the horrible memories of war in my mind. This is true, my friend. We both saw it. The other world beyond this tunnel. And as he said these words, James relived the moments in 1941, but so many unbelievable things had happened that he kept doubting he was not making up things with his mind. As Jason was having fun with his toys and looking at the view of the city from the windows, Arthur looking over at him, overheard James and Vidar's conversation, secretly wishing to appear to them and remember with them the events of the Antarctic expedition, and finally revealed the whole truth to them. Then he was surprised to see another unusual visitor, someone he hadn't seen in many decades. Joel, one of the light elves, was there in the flesh. Only the last time he had seen him, it was after the tragedy in Antarctica, so Arthur and Ulrich were both worried about why he was here. The elf was unaffected by the invisibility mode, and seeing them, greeted the guards. A light elf such as he also wore a transparent look to simple mortals. Anyway, Arthur, Ulrich, he saluted in a soft whisper, not to be overheard by anyone. But for some extraordinary reason, Jason had already seen them, Ulrich, Arthur, and Joel. He noticed the light elf was dressed in a white luminous robe, had white skin and long and straight golden hair, pointy ears, and big green eyes. The young boy stared at them in silence for a while, then continued playing as if magical beings were part of normal life. "What are you doing here?" Arthur wanted to know. He knew why Ulrich and he were here, but the visit on Middle-earth by a light elf was something odd these days. Joel looked at the people they were protecting. "We need to get them out of here," he said, waving towards the families. "The immortals wouldn't understand yet. They shouldn't be here." "What do you mean, Joel?" Ulrich inquired. The light elf was hesitant, but had no option. After all, they were immortals working for the All-Father, so he could trust them. "The orcs have stolen our technology, and it is here, in the custody of the vampires. We came to get it back." Suddenly, many other light elves appeared behind him. Arthur and Ulrich immediately understood the dangers to the families if there were a confrontation with the Order. Somehow, the two immortals had to find a way to convince the families to get out of there as quickly as possible. They had no other choice but to appear to them with normal-looking clothes. Fortunately, their armor was capable of morphing into anything, and they quickly changed to looking themselves over in a mirror for the first time in a very long time. "It feels good to see our reflections, no?" Ulrich and Arthur both had long hair, brown, red, blue, and green eyes respectively, and beards, preserving the look of their mortal life. As kings of the old world, they both had once been. "That way we confirm that we still exist," Arthur agreed with Ulrich, and then went on to interrupt their protégé's reunion. "Excuse me," Arthur said to Grandpa, and looked at him in the eyes, giving him the time to scrutinize him better from head to toe. "Do you remember me, James?" He had known his immortal protector during his military service under the name of Elf, until he had to save his life and come clean about his real name. Arthur had even once believed that he would become the long-awaited new king of the throne, but alas, the Norns had never told him anything other than to be patient for the restoration of the All-Father's throne, and he had respected their will. It was his purpose to serve the will of Yggdrasil. "I think I do," James replied in great surprise, as he had been looking at some old pictures and recalled the old memories, especially the ones of the men who had saved their lives, specifically during this mission. A big smile formed on James' face as he slowly started to accept that everything he had lived was true. Now, as this man and the other one stood in front of them. Are you Arthur and Ulrich? They were both excited to see them. Precisely in this unique moment, when they had reunited to talk about these pictures of the past and recall what had really happened back then. Yes, it's me, old friend. He replied, then hugged him joyfully. James and Vidar were truly thrilled to see Arthur and Ulrich, who had turned out to be their protectors during the expeditions to the far south of this world. At that moment, Jason saw his grandpa hold his imaginary friend, another man with affection, so he ran into their arms to hug them too. Arthur! Jason called him, surprising his grandpa and his old friend. James wondered for a second how it was possible that Arthur and Ulrich looked so much the same as in 1941, like they hadn't aged at all. The old man refrained from believing in things he couldn't comprehend, but he had a wonderful feeling at seeing Arthur again, whom he had thought, after all these years, they had been a product of his imagination to shield himself from the horrors of the war. The two old men also considered how he could be known by the 5-year-old boy, which was another inexplicable coincidence that forced James and Vidar to recognize that there was something extraordinary concerning Arthur and Ulrich. The immortals also wanted to share this moment with them, but they had to hurry them out of the building. Why don't we continue our talk somewhere else? This place is in danger, he explained his honesty. In honesty, there was no other way around it. The old man agreed, suddenly feeling the adrenaline of the battle as if they were back in old times, in action. As they were leaving, they heard a big explosion from somewhere in the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center. We have to go now, Arthur insisted. Everyone was in a panic, hearing people screaming. Luckily, they quickly made it out of the building. From outside, they looked up, trying to see what was going on, and then they heard the next explosion. Then there was a pandemonium in the streets all around them. How did you know something was going to happen? Jane asked Arthur, impressed to have been saved thanks to him once again. Before he could answer, Jared and his wife were there in the street looking for them, panic-stricken like everybody else who had heard the explosions. They found Grandpa, Jason, and Arthur all safe with James' friend from the wall. Everyone was thankfully okay, looking up in horror, seeing smoke coming out of every window. Suddenly, a huge wave of energy passed through the street, burning up all the vehicles. Arthur saw it all, but only had time to cover Jason and his mom Angela, who was holding him, when the wave caught Grandpa, Jared, and his friends. Ulrich was able to save the baby girl Cassandra, but everybody else died instantly from the microwave that shut out as the tower collapsed, changing into a powder that then created an enormous fog of dust all around the block, leaving most people blinded. Jason and Angela had remained still and crying in the horrors while Arthur tried hiding their view of the burnt corpses nearby. Ulrich had led them away immediately from the fallen building and commotion. When he got to a safe place to check on them, Ulrich panicked, realizing Cassandra had been hurt. Her skin was turning purple, she was not breathing, and her little hand was burnt. Arthur rushed to help and see what he could do as another light health appeared to the rescue. All three surrounded the baby girl trying to save her. The magical being illuminated his hands with the intention to heal her. The light coming out of his hand caught Jason's attention, who saw them around Cassandra. He raced towards them, leaving his mother behind for a moment so he would see the miracle up close. As he got closer, he tripped and fell, his right hand landing on the baby as she was being healed by the light. An elvish symbol formed on both their skins. All three noticed it. Both children seemed okay, but the strange mark remained, the healing symbol. Arthur took a deep breath, looking over at Angela to make sure she was okay. She was crying. The loss of James and Jared was terrible. After the events in Antarctica, Arthur had never spoken directly to him again, and now that they had been reunited, death had come to spoil it all. At least, he thought, Jason and Cassandra had survived the attack that he assumed had been provoked by the confrontation between the elves and the vampires, but he had yet to confirm his theory. The whole world of men had been shaken by the event on this day. Later that same afternoon, Arthur was taking them back to St. John's, and Ulrich accompanied them with baby Cassandra, who had been left alone in this world. Angela was shocked by the events that had robbed her of her husband and father-in-law, so much so that she never realized how she got back with Arthur, who was Jason's imaginary friend, and she assumed that the other man carrying the baby was Grandpa's friend, but did not think about it. Ulrich only stayed in Newfoundland while deciding what to do. Joel, the light elf, showed up a few days later. We weren't able to recover what has been stolen from us, complained the light elf. The vampires have helped the orcs in their endeavor. Who knows now what they're going to do with such power? What do you want us to do? Arthur asked politely, although he had his own mission to accomplish and was still emotionally hurt by the tragedy that almost ruined his 7 centuries of work, protecting the last descendants of the Asgardian throne. Be prepared. Soon there will be war and destruction. Our only hope to stop the evil creatures is to restore the Allfather's throne. Well, as you can see, Joel, the heirs are still pretty young. Ulrich explained, there's nothing we can do now to restore the Aesir throne. They need to be strong and prepared first. The city of heavens is occupied by the Order of the Snake, and this boy and he had her sleeping in his arms, are the last remaining heirs of Odin. Joel nodded. It wasn't his place to argue with the holy warriors of Odin, but he looked at Arthur for a moment because he knew this wasn't entirely true. Arthur acted as if he had no idea, though, so Joel understood that he had chosen to remain silent. The light elf retreated politely and then vanished in front of their eyes into his light portal. In the following days, the two immortals had agreed to keep their distances from each other, during which time Jason and Cassandra could grow up, as it was vital that these two remaining heirs were not discovered by the Order until they were ready to reclaim the throne of the Allfather, some 19 years later.